Well, good morning. My name is Norma Vijeila, and I am a high school principal. I work in an alternative education program. I've been in alternative education for about 17 years. I work with students that are typically already disengaged or are about one emotional outburst or one event from disengaging completely from school. My students range from 14 to 24 years old. We have fabulous students, but a lot of our students are struggling with just, life circumstances and getting through school and doing everything that they need in order to go on to the next phase of life. So the title of my presentation today is Responsiveness is at the Heart of Caring. And in thinking about responsiveness, I was in the hospital a couple of weeks ago with my dad. My dad ended up in the hospital and he was there for a few weeks. And there was one night when everything just started to deteriorate and everything started to happen. His heart rate was up, his kidneys were not functioning well. And I was just fascinated by this whole coordination of the doctors and the medical group and the nurses and everybody that went into this like state of alarm when something happened to my dad. So in a matter of minutes, they had a rapid response team. They call it a rapid response team. And this rapid response team just swooped in. When something was happening to my dad, they knew exactly what each person was doing. I was just fascinated by seeing them all speak, talk together, be able to say, okay, you take care of this. There's oxygen, you take care of this. Just everything was so coordinated and it happened in a matter of just a few minutes. He was able to be stable. He went to ICU, but then after he went to ICU, he returned back to the main floor at the hospital. And it wasn't like that was it, rapid response team, we're done, we're gonna send him back home. But it was like the aftercare that they provided that got me to think like, there's a lot of times that we're doing rapid response team sessions with our students. But then the aftercare is the one that's going to be most valuable for that student being able to recover from whatever emotional breakdown or whatever thing that happened to them, so that we can support them in their well-being. Responsiveness is definitely the quality of reacting quickly and positively. And I think this year we're dealing with a lot more struggles. Just all of us are struggling with something. All of us are having a lot of emotional realities that are affecting the way we are reacting. Now more than ever, we need a culture of belonging, connection, and care. So the purpose for today is for us to just start thinking about how we respond and how do we get these response teams at our schools or in our work environment, so that we can not only respond to emotional outbursts, but also what do we do in the aftermath of emotional outbursts. It's evident, we're currently experiencing what seems a crisis in education. I've been in education, I would say, for all my life. I've been dealing with educators since I started preschool, and I'm still, in educational environments. So I would say I have a lot of experience just dealing with the educational system and what educators do. And I must say the work of educators is absolutely important. But right now we're experiencing what seems a crisis in education. Our students, more than ever, we're seeing students that are tired, they're bored, and they're stressed. And this was before COVID. Now, as we're going through COVID and the crisis of COVID and just the digital learning, online learning, coming back to school, not knowing what's going to happen this school year, our students are definitely stressed and frustrated. What also happens is our teachers are also frustrated. They're pressured and they're overwhelmed. There's a lot of new things that they have to learn. There's a lot of new key performance indicators that they have to meet, that they're all new and foreign to them. Okay, just in reading everything that's going on in education, we know that chronic absenteeism is at record highs. Students are disengaging. I see it at my own school. A lot of our students that we had before COVID, now as we're, navigating this 1 year later, we're dealing with a lot of kids that are just completely hopeless and they don't want to return back to school. Also, how do we respond to all of this change? Being an educator for the last couple of years, I've seen that we're attempting to control our student behavior by introducing new math and literacy programs, and also saying we're gonna higher up the standards. But what we're not doing is dealing with the emotional issues that intervene with our students being able to meet the higher standards. Okay, none of these solutions have addressed the fact that how our students feel will definitely connect with the way they're learning. So very important to understand that the way we feel, it gives us the capacity to be able to learn something new. The goal for this session, and thinking about presenting at this session, I wanted to make sure that I just share. But I also want to learn, and I also want to engage people to come and collaborate with me, or also like for me to have this open conversation about like what else can we continue to do. So there's 3 things that I want to accomplish today. The first one is share how the emotional poverty training has been beneficial for my campus culture. I've seen a transformation in the last couple of years. I've been a principal at this school for 5 years. And in the last 3 years, I've been utilizing emotional poverty training just with my staff, with my students, and with every support system that comes into contact with my students. The second thing, I want to share the tools that have developed emotional competence and strength in our students. So there are tools that we can put in place so that our students are emotionally connected, and also that the adults on campus understand how to increase our emotional competence. Number 3, I want to share how our awareness of the adults' emotional realities at schools can participate in the safety and well-being of students on campus. And I'm going to say this one more time because this is super important. And this for me was like a big aha moment. Understanding that adults need to also understand their emotional realities so that they could also impact the well-being of our students. Because it's not only teaching our students how to deal with their emotional realities, that's one piece of the puzzle. It also has to do with the adults that are bringing in that emotional energy into the classroom. And sometimes when crisis happens, it's going to be about how the adult reacts to this crisis that we're going to see positive results at the end. Okay, so those 3 things, I just want to make sure that we understand that we have to share. More than ever, we have to share what we're doing so that we can improve what we're doing for our students. There's a lot of learning, and I don't claim to be the expert, but I love to learn so that I can impact my school environment and also myself. The way I react with my students as the administrator is also going to highly impact the outcome of that student. So right now, youth stress is at a record high. Research shows that youth have stress levels that surpass those of adults. I'm going to say this one more time, okay? According to the research, we're finding out that our youth has stress levels that surpass those of adults. In thinking about my youth, and seeing my 2 daughters grow, I think they have a lot more competing factors that intervene with their well-being and with their learning. So I could see how this translates into our youth having a record high, like even more stress than adults. Also, our teenagers are now the world leaders in violence, binge drinking, marijuana use, and obesity. Now, all of this stress is definitely impacting how our teenagers are behaving and also how they're coping with that stress. Over the last 2 decades, there have been a 28% increase in the suicide rate. And I would tell you that in the last couple of years, I have seen more students verbalizing that they have suicidal thoughts. Now, one of my friends just started as an assistant principal at a school. And I asked her, for the first couple of days, like, how are you doing? How's your school? How's everything? How are the first days of school? And she said, Norma, for the first couple of days, the only thing that we've been dealing with have been with a lot of our students having anxiety attacks or also verbalizing that they have suicide thoughts, because of everything going on in the world and also coming into school and also the social pressures. So definitely this is something that is like a common topic at all of our schools. It's not only my schools or at your schools, but it's happening everywhere. Our students are losing their hope. And that for me is like alarming, and we have to do something about it. So youths are stressed. What about our teachers? Our teachers are also dealing with a lot of stress. In the last couple of years, we've increased the amount of things that they have to do. Also, we've said, now you got to learn how to teach online. And this last year, we said, you got to navigate teaching and insight instruction and also dealing with online instruction. So our teachers are also highly overwhelmed and stressed. Okay, there was in collaboration with the New Teacher Center, more than 25,000 educators were surveyed. And what the survey found is that 70% these teachers spent 70% of their work days feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. This is alarming. I work with educators. And as a human being, I don't want my educators to sit in the parking lot every day and feel that they can't come in, or that they're having reservations about coming into the campus because they're feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. Not only that, I also have children, I have nephews, I have a lot of young people that I love. And I feel that, they deserve an educator that is feeling happy and joyful about their work. So I think with dealing with emotions, we also have to pay a lot of attention with how are our teachers feeling. It's not only the students, it's also how are our teachers feeling. Teachers have and forever have had one of the most important jobs. So I think we have to pay a lot of attention on how are they doing. I'm not okay with thinking that it's okay for our teachers to feel frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. So we have to do something about that. So what is an emotional breakdown? An emotional meltdown. Everybody has them. It happens to everybody. I'm going to tell you a story about one of my students, Fantasia. Fantasia, I just attended her graduation this past June, and she graduated. She is a young mother. She had been in foster care, had been navigating between different school systems. And finally, she came to our school 2 years ago, about more than 2 years ago. One day, Fantasia arrived to school after being absent for about 2 weeks. She arrived to school, with severe anxiety, severe attitude, and just came to the office and said, I need a proof of enrollment. I need you to give me a proof of enrollment. I need it today. Demanding that we give her a proof of enrollment. The front desk person said, well, why would I give you a proof of enrollment? You haven't been in school. So I don't think I can give you a proof of enrollment. We have to have, your teachers meet with you. I need the administrator to come in. I need to find out, why haven't you been in school? So this student didn't want to hear anything else. She just emotionally just had an emotional meltdown. She went on a high and she called everybody, every name that she could. She said she hated the school. She didn't want to come back. She insulted everybody. And on her way out, she definitely stormed out and insulted everybody. Emotional meltdown, The way I see, the way I tell my people, these are all learning opportunities. But the way I told this front desk gal, when she called me, she told me what had happened. And I went, I totally understand that the student disrespected everybody, but let's take a step back. What was her frustration? Why was she asking for a proof of enrollment? And she said, well, I don't know, but she had not been here in a couple of weeks. So I said, okay, everybody has emotional meltdowns. So this might have been one of her emotional meltdowns, but I think it also had to do with the way you reacted to her rather than in a compassionate way. You just told her, like, you haven't been in school. So for her, it might have been accusatory. The expectation was that this kid be removed and disciplined and put on a expulsion or a suspension. And, I said, well, if we suspend her, what's that going to do to her? She's already been suspended herself. She hasn't been in school for 2 weeks. So let's try another approach and let's see how we can get her back. In talking to this person that have been totally insulted by the student, I said, let's go ahead and try something. Let's call the student and let's find out what's happening to her. And then we'll determine what the next steps are. So 45 minutes after this incident happened, I call the student, I call her cell phone number, and I ask her, Fantasia, I'm calling to see how you're doing. And she said, well, I said, I'm the school principal, and I'm just calling to see how you're doing. She said, well, I know that you found out that I had, that I went off on everybody and that I called everybody names. I know that you're probably calling me to suspend me or kick me out of the school. And I said, no, I'm calling to find out how you're feeling. So she told me, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I have a 2-year-old daughter. I don't have childcare. I can't come to school because I don't have childcare. In order to get childcare, I need a proof of enrollment. And in order to get the proof of enrollment, I need to be in school. So she's like, which one? How could I do that? And I said, okay, now let's go to the incident that happened. I said, I can help you with that, but let's go to the incident that happened. We talked about the incident that happened. We negotiated. I said, I need you to come in the next, 2 hours. I'm going to be waiting for you and we're going to talk about it. And we're also going to do this apologizing to everybody that you insulted. And then we're going to move on. So she ended up coming in. She apologized to everybody. She was able to get her proof of enrollment and she was able to move on. And now she's a high school graduate. Now, had we taken the other route of saying, emotional meltdown, these are the consequences for an emotional meltdown on campus, and we're done. What emotional poverty has done for my school campus is that we're able to have these conversations about emotions, and also understanding that emotions happen to all of us. Emotional meltdowns happen to all of us. Okay. And also understanding that all sorts of factors influence our emotions. Sometimes it's sleep deprivation. Sometimes it's that we're hungry. Sometimes it's that we've been triggered by something else. But with an emotional meltdown, what I tell the adults on my campus is that we need to do something in order to control our emotions so that we don't trigger further emotions from our students. We're dealing with students that, come in with emotions, and the way I explain it is like every person is like a soda pop or a fizzy drink. From the outside, it looks very safe. It looks fine. It looks, we all look like we're functioning well. But if those emotions, the fizzy, the little bubbles that are inside of us get shaken up, we eventually have an emotional meltdown. So with that, the cost of not dealing with emotions is not the answer. Not dealing with emotions is not the answer. According to the research, is that the cost of not dealing with emotions deals with drugs, bullying and harassment. It leads to teacher stress. In work environments, it leads to employee disengagement. It also increases mental health problems. The happiness report says that, not dealing with our emotions also makes people clearly unhappy. It also leads to anxiety disorders, depression, and this big piece of data anticipating that mental health costs can escalate to $16 trillion by the year 2030. So not dealing with emotions is not only putting us in a unsafe environment, it also is eventually going to cost a lot, not only for our school environment, but also for all of us. It can lead to a lot of problems in the future. So not dealing with emotions is definitely not the answer. Right now, ensuring that young people feel that they belong and that they're engaged is super important. Ensuring right now that adults are feeling cared and loved and that they have somebody that they can count on, whether it is at school or in their work environment, is absolutely crucial right now more than ever. So the research is clear. Let's talk about emotions. Emotions determine whether academic content will be processed and remembered. If we're not emotionally well, we're not going to be able to receive new content, new learning. That's the research says that there's this connection between emotions and also the way we learn. Okay, linking emotions to learning ensures that students find classroom instruction relevant. So if we're able to understand how we function emotionally, we will be able to understand how that instruction how we can engage students and all of us, even as adults, in learning. Emotions support students in discovering their purpose and passion. It's what drives persistence. So there's a lot of research that talks about like persistence has to do with how we're emotionally connected. Okay. After the Columbine shooting in Colorado, the Department of Education and the U.S. Secret Service joined to conduct a series of studies on school violence. Okay. The report emphasized the need for behavioral threat assessments. Okay, that we have to put behavioral threat assessments in our schools so that we can prevent something as horrible as what happened in Columbine. Now, since then, I don't think we've even scratched the surface of putting emotional or behavioral threat assessments in our schools, because a lot of times we think it's going to take a lot of time and we think it's going to take a lot of money and resources. But not putting behavioral threat assessments and talking about emotions and feelings at schools, it could result in something that could be detrimental to our school environments. And not only schools, I think we're also seeing it. I mean, anytime I turn on the news, we're seeing that there's this emotional outburst that result into something horrible, like road rage, shootings at work, just all of these things that have to do with emotions and somebody not being emotionally connected, or sometimes that person not having somebody that could ask them, how are you doing? How are you feeling? So responsiveness is definitely at the heart of caring. If we care, we have to be able to respond. If we care, we have to be able to respond positively. Okay. Something about emotions is that all of our emotions are an emotional state determines where we direct our attention. So emotions are information. Okay. Emotion can tell us what we will remember and what we will learn. Okay. Also, emotions and feelings support our decision making. On any given day, the way you're feeling and the way your emotions are will support what decision you're going to make, what next steps you're going to take. Okay. Feelings matter in social relations. So in order for us to build relationships, positive or negative relationships, our feelings matter. Emotions also influence our health. There's a lot of research nowadays that says how the emotional well-being of a person will determine their health well-being. Emotions also affect our creativity, our effectiveness, and also our performance. Depending how we feel emotionally, it's how creative and how we're going to be able to perform. Okay. Now, linking emotions to learning is very important for my school site, because in order to understand how students are learning, we have to be able to explore their emotions. Okay. Emotions. This is the interesting thing about emotions. Emotions are like a roller coaster. It's on any given day. They could be at a high, they could be at a low. So for us to understand emotions in our environment, it's absolutely important. We have to understand that everybody carries those emotions, and also that the way we interact with people may affect their emotions. So negative emotions and emotional poverty. It is particularly a serious problem in our school, because typically in schools, when students exhibit negative emotions and they exhibit anger or like anxiety or something negative, we typically go and say, how do we reprimand children when, sometimes it's a big cry for help. There was a student, Maisha, Maisha was a very expressive student. She was a 12th grader. At our school, we have very clear guidelines on when students graduate, they get to walk in our graduation. Because in previous years, we have allowed students to walk in the graduation and then they never come back to complete their last math course or their English course or their science course. So, 5 years ago when I started at this school, I said, well, in order for students to participate in the graduation, we're going to have to complete everything. And if not, they don't get to participate in graduation. This student thought that because she had 10 credits to go, that she could get away with walking and completing the courses later. So the counselor met with the student, told her, you can't walk in graduation. The teachers met with the student and told her, you are not going to be able to walk in graduation because you have to complete all of the courses. And typically at my school, when I say, when a student has a problem, I need you to give them my cell phone number so that they call me personally. This student, Maisha, went on a rampage of just being super upset and just saying how, horrible this school was, that she was not going to be able to participate. She had already made arrangements to have her family go to her graduation. She had already made all of these arrangements to ensure that, that she was going to celebrate with a big, big celebration. So she was upset. She texted me, she went on a rampage also on text, because that's what a lot of students do now. They don't call, they're not going to call, they're not going to come in, they're going to tell you, they're going to put it on a text, or they're going to put it on something where they express their emotions in writing. So this student in particular went off, completely off, called me, among some of the things, she called me evil and old. And she said, you're 100% evil and you're 100% old, like triggering my emotions, because who wants to be called an evil old lady? So I let that student, her emotions, I knew that her emotions, all of her fizzy bubbles inside of her were at a record high that night that she texted me. She triggered me too, because I'm like, how dare she talks to me that way? And how dare does she call me old? I waited until the next morning, and the next morning I texted her and I said, Maisha, I need you to come and I need you to meet me at school, at my office today. So she comes in and I told her, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And she said, I'm really frustrated. I'm not going to be able to participate in my graduation. She gave me all of the reasons, all of the plans that she had for graduation. And I told her, no, this is the reason why we don't do it. I can't be unfair to every student that has the same situation. Now, we talked about, the equity of that. But then I talked to her about her response and what she had texted me. And I said, well, do you think this is fair to do all of this on text and also to call everybody at the school, all of these horrible things just because they didn't meet your expectations? So she was able to calm down and clarify, like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just like super upset at that moment, but I'm really frustrated and I feel shame because I'm not going to get to participate in my graduation. So out of that meeting with Maisha, what we were able to consider is that not only for some of our students that are not graduating on time, I said, what we're going to do, you and I, we're going to think about a way to solve this. And you're still not going to walk in this graduation because you didn't meet the requirements. But what we're going to do is we're going to start a forum to get participants to see if there's anybody that wants to participate in a December or November graduation. That way you and other students don't have to wait, or not participate in any graduation. So out of that was like a resolution. Now, had I gone the route that says, let's reprimand the student for what she did, especially, triggering me, I'm the administrator at the school, we would have ended up saying, well, you're going to be suspended, and that would have put her further behind. So I just think the way we react, the way we care for our students, even in the midst of all of this, it's going to definitely determine. Like, now, this student ended up graduating, going to college. She still calls me because she has my cell. She calls me or texts me just to let me know that she's doing well. But that was, a relationship that I was able to build. Now with this student, after that happened, It wasn't just like, okay, we had this conversation, let's go. We never see each other or we never talk again. No, I told her, you know what I'm going to do with you is I want to become your mentor. So I want to check in on you to see how you're doing and also how you're able to get through your courses. The importance of having one caring adult, especially when we are triggered emotionally, will determine how we will deal in the future with our emotions. So for this particular student, you know, I was able to say, like, I'm going to be your mentor. But when these negative emotions happen at my school with other students, I can't take every student under my wing and say, I'm going to be your mentor and I'm going to be checking in on you. But what we do is we have this system where if a student has an emotional outcry where we see that they need help, we typically assign one adult that has formed a positive relationship with them. So we do have these conversations about emotions and also what do we do in the aftermath of emotions. But this has come from the work of understanding emotional poverty. So I do want to say, like, if in order to put something in place at your schools, you have to start that conversation. So by the time your students have these emotional triggers and these emotional explosions, that you're able to say, okay, now what do we do in the aftermath of this emotional explosion? Emotions and the brain. Emotions are clearly connected with our brain. You know, everything stems from our brain. I have a 9-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old daughter. And I've been doing a lot of reading about emotional poverty. I've been doing a lot of reading about like the science of transformation, about how our emotions affect us. But one thing that I found very helpful in explaining things to my daughters about emotions is, you know, what Ruby has in the emotional poverty book that she uses from Dr. Siegel that talks about like the consistency of the brain. So with my 9-year-old, you know, 2 years ago, I explained to her, okay, you know, this is our brain. Like put your little fists together and put them together. And I told her, this is your brain. Okay. Something important about your brain is that it is the consistency of butter. So it is like really soft. It's fragile, and you know, it's a very, very important. It's very important for us to take care of our brain. Second thing is our brain controls our emotions. Our emotional system is controlled up here in the brain. Okay. Then I told her about the amygdala. I said, you don't have to remember the name, but you have to remember that the amygdala typically is tucked in, you know, prefrontal cortex and all of that. I didn't want her to like get mumbo jumboed with all of that, but I just told her, this is where like your brain is the one that's going to determine in any situation, whether you're going to move towards it or away from it. So in every situation, you're evaluating whether you're going to freeze, run, or fight, you know, and especially when we have an emotional trigger, that's the decision that you're going to make. Okay. Also, this emotional, the brain is where we carry information about, you know, things that have happened to us. So a lot of times when we respond to situations, we respond in terms of what information we have stored in here. Okay. The back of the hand is where we carry all of our thoughts. And I said, so all of our thoughts, the way we respond, the way we have responded in the past or seen other people respond, all of this information is stored in here. Then I told her, you know, when you have an emotional trigger, and it happens to all of us, our brain goes like this. So this is what Ruby Payne talks about, the unintegrated, unregulated brain. All of these like pieces that should be connecting and talking together, all of a sudden go in a state of alert. You know, I've also told my daughters, usually this state of alert, according to the research, lasts about 95 seconds. So it goes into this state of alert, and this will determine how we're going to respond. Okay. So my daughters use that all the time now in talking about their emotions. You know, they had an emotional trigger and they say, my brain went like this, you know. All of our reactions and all of the information and the way we behave, all of that is stored in the way we've acquired that information. Okay. So when your brain is unintegrated, unregulated, you have an emotional hit, it's when your brain goes like this. Now, typically when the brain goes like this and it's in this state of alert, there's no learning that's going to happen. Learning doesn't happen when you have that constant state of alert. With the students that I'm working with, I find that a lot of the times their brains are coming in like this, just in walking from home to work, their brains are on a high. Interactions that they have with other students, their brains go on unintegrated, unregulated. Sometimes interactions that they have with other educators on our campus, it causes them. But we have to understand that we have to be okay with sometimes, our brain going like this, but it's going to be the aftermath. What do we do in order to bring our brain back to integrated and regulated? So my children find this fascinating because they're always talking about like, my brain went like this, and I'm like, okay, so let's talk about the emotion that you felt. How do you feel? How do you feel now? But it's allowed them to control that. Now, when things happen at my school, I let my students cool down, but in the aftermath, I do tell them, when you had that emotional reaction, it's not that you're a bad person, or it's not that you just lose control and don't know how to get back into control. A lot of it has to do with your brain. And a lot of times it's what you do after you have that emotional hit. So I tell my students, when you have that emotional hit in those 90 seconds, after those 90 seconds happen, we can feed our emotions or our thoughts with positive things. But if we feed those emotions with negative things, then it's just going to continue to escalate and we're going to continue in this state. Kids find that really interesting. And, my little kids particularly find that interesting, but it allows us to have a conversation about our brain and our emotions. So let's take a pause. Let's take a deep breath. And let me ask you, how are you feeling? A few years ago, we had a lot of tragedies happening at my school. In a matter of a couple of weeks, we had 3 students dying. 2 of them we lost street violence; they were shot, and one of them we lost because he committed suicide. And in all of this, we were dealing with every day, dealing with the emotions, not only of the students, but also the emotions of the educators on campus. And just thinking of like all of this violence and how it affects us, and the emotions and the feelings and the thoughts that we have on a daily basis. My school psychologist, in the midst of all of this, taught me a super valuable lesson. One day I came in, and as the administrator, everybody's looking at you for answers. Everybody's looking at you for like, what do we do? What do we do in the midst of tragedy? What do we do now? And I could assure you that every day during that period, I would wake up and I would just say, I want to give up. Like, I can't do this anymore. This is hard. I would drive to school and I would sit in the parking lot and I would just take deep breaths and just try to calm my emotions. But what I really wanted to do was just cry, give up, say, I can't do this anymore. This is affecting me in a way that I don't even know how to react, And then in thinking about, like, I was just thinking about myself, like, I can't continue to do this. This is hard. I came in and I checked in with everybody. And then the school psychologist said, Norma, this is hard, but how are you feeling? And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, nobody has ever asked me that question. In the school setting, you're the administrator, you're supposed to just like react and like compensate and just be able to like have a solution and have a strategic plan. And I just sat down and I melted and I'm like, oh my goodness, I am feeling scared. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling sad. I feel that I can't do this anymore. And it was just like this opening of like, this is the way that I'm feeling. And I have to be able to tell people that this is the way that I'm feeling. And he said, it is important for us to understand how people are feeling. So from that day on, in every situation, when things happen in my home environment, in my work environment, with my friends, I remember that this is one of the most important questions that we can ask people. How are you feeling? Now, the problem we have is when we tell people, how are you feeling? Typically the reaction, the immediate response is, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling groovy, I'm feeling fine. Or my favorite one is, I'm just too busy. Just feelings are not important right now. I'm just too busy. I need to get things done. Research says that we don't have a lot of language to be able to talk about feelings. And also, depending on different cultures have different words for different feelings, but many cultures just don't have that many words, that much vocabulary, that much language to express feelings. So this is something that, as a population, our feelings are not something that we talk about. Also because we typically think that when we talk about our feelings, it's going to expose our weaknesses. So it is very important for us to find out how we're feeling ourselves, but also to be able to ask those questions. So from then on, my favorite question to ask, and I get all sorts of responses, is like, how are you feeling? How are you feeling today? Because if you ask the question, how are you doing? You're going to get the same response, but it has nothing to do with how you're feeling. And how you're doing has a lot to do with how you're feeling. So this is a very important question. Just continue to ask, how are you feeling? So now that we know how we're feeling, in our own mind, how are we feeling? I want to ask you, how do you think teachers are feeling? As I said, teachers have one of the most important jobs. Every human being interacts with a teacher. We all spend a lot of time interacting with teachers, whether we have kids and their students, whether we are educators, whether we work in any, in the health profession or in the, in whatever your profession is, all of us have interacted with teachers. So when you ask teachers too, how are you feeling? You're going to get the same response. You're going to get the, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling fine. And now most of the time, I'm just feeling busy. Busy is my constant feeling. What research has found, I told you before, is that 70% of teachers' time is spent feeling overwhelmed, stressed, and frustrated. And that's really not a good feeling. If we want our students to be successful, if we want our kids to be successful, we have to put a lot of focus on how our teachers are feeling, okay? Makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable when we talk about feelings. It makes a lot of teachers feel uncomfortable when we talk about feelings. But what I found on my campus is that I've given my teachers permission to talk about their feelings. And yes, we're able to say like, I'm feeling anxious and I'm feeling frustrated. And then from there, it gives me information so that I could do something about it, because we have to be able to ensure that our educators, that our teachers are feeling well, because those are the ones that are going to be impacting our school environment and also our students' lives. So, third question, how do you think our students are feeling? How do you think our kids are feeling today? When students were asked, how do you feel each day in school? Okay, 77% of their responses were negative. The three most frequent answers for students being asked, like, how are you feeling in school every day, was tired, stressed, and bored. This is not a good feeling, because this is definitely adding to your school environment, but also it's more than anything, it's interfering with learning. And it's also interfering with the positive thoughts that they have, not only when they're in school, but also when they're outside of school. 1 in 5 Americans right now, 1 in 5 American children is experiencing mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. As I told you, like one of the main things that we're dealing in schools right now is with kids having anxiety attacks and also feeling very hopeless, depressed. And we're seeing it in the way they're interacting in our classrooms. Okay, we need to stop start talking about feelings and emotions. Ignoring feelings and emotions in any environment is definitely not the answer. For my school, starting to talk about feelings and emotions of my students is absolutely at the top of my list before we go even into like, what are we doing in terms of math and English and social studies? What are we doing in terms of like everything else? We have to start by addressing how are we feeling. So equity, as I told you, I'm not the expert. I don't have the answers for everything. But one thing that I've learned in dealing with feelings and emotions and how we interact and deal with our students is that there is not one set script. And also not one size is going to fit all of my students. Not one size is going to fit all of the staff members at my school. So in cultivating positive emotions, we have to remember that equity is giving people what they need in order to be successful. Okay. Teaching students about emotion benefits all children of every background, but more specifically, being able to talk about emotions and feelings, it's gonna highly benefit our students that are coming from low income communities, and also those that are experiencing high levels of trauma and adversity, and also those that are dealing with food, insecure access to food or housing, or insecure access to care and safety. So in order to put together a program that addresses our emotions and the emotions of our students, we have to take that into consideration. But very important is to understand that our students that are coming from low income and insecure housing, food, healthcare, and safety are going to highly benefit from us starting to talk about emotions. What I found out with my students is these are the students that typically never go home and there's somebody asking them, how are you feeling? How was your day? How are you doing? These are the students that never have an opportunity, or like rarely have an opportunity to really express how are you feeling, or what are your emotions today? What are you dealing with today? So keeping in mind that we have to be able to tailor our programs in order to fit our specific student population. Where do we start? The big question is like, where do we start in education? Where do we even start with talking about emotions and feelings, and how do we approach emotional poverty? It is highly important to enlist educators to do the following things. It's not going to be this type of work. It's not going to be something that just your superintendent or the person in charge is going to be able to implement all across the board. This is something that has to be a shared goal and also a shared strategy, because everybody has to come to the table. So in order for us to start talking about emotions and emotional skills, we have to get our educators to sit at a table or to share ideas, so that we're all ensuring that we're meeting the needs not only of our students, but also of the school environment. So it's very important to understand the importance of emotional skills in order to reach our children. Number one, from the top, management or the superintendent's office, there has to be an understanding that emotional skills are very important in order for us to reach our students. Number two, we have to be able to say, what are the emotional realities in our classroom? We have to be able to explore that. Like, what is affecting our students in this classroom dance that we do daily, or this environment dance that we do daily? We have to be able to say, like, what is happening to them. But that information, you're not going to collect it as an administrator just by being in an office or doing walkthroughs. The people that are going to know this is going to be the people that are interacting with our students on a daily basis. Number three, we have to share tools to support positive behavior. One of the most important things is to understand, what are the tools that are out there? What are the strategies that are out there to support positive behavior? But also understanding that one strategy or one tool that we take out of our pocket is not going to meet the needs of every student. It's going to be being able to have that conversation about, what do we do for that particular situation so that we can support positive behavior. And the end goal is to support positive behavior. Number four, we have to be able to separate discipline strategies and interventions that build motivation in students. So we have to have different strategies when there's an event at our school. We have to have the strategies that motivate the positive behavior. And of course, we still have to have the, interventions and discipline and all of that in order to address, student behavior at our schools. But what we have to do is have a plan so that we ensure that that negative behavior doesn't happen again. It's the aftermath, is what we do when we are in a crisis. It's the most important thing that we could do, is set something that's going to continue to motivate positive behavior rather than enhance the negative behavior. Okay, we also have to be able to address the factors that create the emotional noise. Everybody's coming into an environment, into our school environment, into our work environment, into any environment with their own emotional noise. So we have to be able to address the factors that reduce that emotional noise, but also be able to understand what is creating more emotional noise. And I think we're able to see when there's emotional noise in an environment. We're able to determine that. But we have to get all educators to be able to experience this and be able to talk about this and be able to address this, so that when crisis happens, just like at the hospital with my dad, there's a rapid response team that says, what are you going to be able to do? What are you going to do? What are you in charge of? And then at the end, how are we going to send this student back to the main floor with a support system that doesn't say like they're done, we're done with this behavior, like we're going to move on, but rather what do we do in the future to promote a positive behavior from that particular student. So when your brain melts down, talked about the, in your face, the emotional, like unintegrated, unregulated brain. My daughter came in one day and said, my dad had his brain go like this, and I told her, tell me what happened when your dad, your brains went like this. I love it because she's able to explain that. Like basically my dad had an emotional meltdown and he was upset about something, and that, that he was upset at us because we did something. And I said, okay, so what were you able to do with that in your face explosion? Like, what was your reaction? This is my 9-year-old. And she said, well, I just waited for him to have his emotional trigger go through. And then I was able to ask him, what does he need me to do? Very smart of my daughter to understand that it's an emotional trigger, and we have to allow it to calm down. But the reality is that we have to understand that we all lose our minds. And this Daniel Siegel mentions it and talks about it in his book, Mindsight, where he says everybody is capable of losing their mind at any given point. He talks about a story with his own children and how, an incident happened and immediately like his brain goes into this unregulated, unintegrated. And then the way we react, and it happens also to me and it happens to all of us, and we react in the way we have that information. So if I react in a certain way and then I'm questioning, like, why would I react that way? Why, when my daughter did something, why did I react that way? Like, why would I know emotions and I understand the brain, but it's the information that we carry. And in that like moment of trigger, like we go immediately into that unregulated, unintegrated, and we look into those memories and past experiences, and we're able to say, okay, this is how it reacted. Okay. It is very easy. It is very easy. And we see it all day, every day. We see people having this explosions and in your face. So for us to ignore that this happens, it's also not an answer. Like, we have to understand that this type of explosions and this in your face emotional reactions happens all the time, and it happens constantly. For the educators on my campus, I'm going and saying, okay, everybody has like this in your face explosion, But also just the same way that we have this in your face explosion, we also have like the fingerprints and all of these little marks that we have on our hands. We all have a different way of reacting to it, okay? And emotional triggers, the emotional triggers of the educator, just the same way are as the emotional triggers of children. There's 4 issues that impact the emotions in the classroom, okay? And one is going to be just the same way that I'm talking about, like every hand is different. Everybody's going to have a different type of, shape or color, or your fingerprints are different. Same thing is going to happen with every adult and every student. Everybody's going to react differently. So there's 4 issues from adults that impacted the emotions in the classroom. The first one is the adult's personal bonding and attachment. The first couple of years and the first our bonding and attachment with caring adults has to do a lot with how we are reacting with our emotional triggers. The second one, the adult's energy level. You can walk into any environment, and a lot of us are able to feel like, what is the energy level in this classroom today? What is the energy level in this restaurant or this coffee shop? Now, the adult's energy level highly impacts that emotion, the emotions and the emotional triggers. Number 3, the emotional triggers of the adult. If a student goes into this emotional trigger and says something or does something that triggers the adult, then you're not only going to have one emotional triggered person in the classroom. Now you're going to have 2 people that are emotionally triggered. So it's the emotional triggers of the adults that also impact the emotions in the classroom. And number 4, also the stages of development, where they're at in their life. And Ruby Payne talks about an emotional poverty in her first book. She talks about the adults' age of development, their stages, where they're at in their development. Also, that has a lot to do with the way we're going to react. We're all in different stages of our life, and that also is going to impact how we impact other people's emotions and also our own emotions. So we are living in a constant need to respond. Every day we have to make decisions about how do we respond? How do we respond to situations? How do we respond to the information that is given to us? How do we respond? We could be driving and somebody cuts us off, and we have to make an immediate response on how are we going to respond to this particular situation. Okay. Responsiveness is the quality of reacting quickly and positively. Okay. Responsiveness right now, we're searching for a place where we can start assessing the situations. And just understanding that in order to respond, we have to be in tune with our emotions and relationships. We have to be able to determine what are the response systems that we're going to have in place. So responsiveness has to be clearly tied with care and with a positive approach. After a crisis, people who have more positive feelings may be more resilient than those that are experiencing fewer positive emotions. And this, when a crisis hits, whether it is a small crisis or a big crisis or a countrywide crisis or a worldwide crisis, it doesn't only impact our health and safety, but it also impacts our well-being, the way we think, the way we process information, the way we react. Okay. In the wake of the 9/11, the attacks, U.S. college students who were more positive who experienced more positive feelings, they were more resilient than those who experienced fewer positive feelings. Okay. U.S. college students were tested, and those who were surveyed that expressed gratitude and love and so forth, they were able to have less depressive symptoms. Okay. There's a report that came out from Emotional Recovery After a Crisis, and it talks about how many people are, after a crisis, many people just focus on the health and the safety after a crisis. But when crisis affects our emotional health, and when we understand that crisis affects our emotional health, we also have to understand that in order to recover for a crisis, we have to give it time. crisis recovery takes time. So as I said, whether it is a small crisis or a big crisis, we have to be able to determine like how much time do we put into that recovery, okay? After a crisis, and this I see it with my educators, with my mom, my dad, the people that I live with, or the people that I work with, and my friends, we're all experiencing fear, sometimes shock, sometimes disbelief, depression, sometimes anger, and sometimes a lot of sense of guilt. Okay, these emotional reactions are typical. These are signs of high stress. And in addressing them, we have to be able to talk about like, how do we address these emotions and how do we put support systems in place? So in a crisis in our school, right now we're dealing with the crisis of COVID. COVID is a constant crisis. There are days that we think we're going to go back to school and everything is going to be back to normal. There are days that we're talking about masking or not masking, vaccinated, not vaccinated. When are we going to do the survey? So all of these things that are constantly putting us in crisis, and then dealing with somebody got sick or somebody passed away from COVID or somebody had something else that is COVID related, or sometimes not even COVID related, but is affecting the way we interact with each other. So after a crisis, we have to be able to say, how do we ensure that people are expressing more positive feelings so that we can recover together? And that's one of the things that, in talking about resilience, we have to be able to talk about how do we become stronger together, and how do we develop these positive emotions so that we can spread that also to our students and also to our young people that they don't know how to deal with emotions yet, and they're still dealing with how do they cope with all of this that's happening. It's not only education, it's not only academic, but it's also everything that's going on outside of their academic well-being. Resilience. I'm fascinated with learning about resilience. I'm fascinated with researching like what makes some people more resilient than others. According to the American Psychological Association, resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. Okay, such as a family relationship problem, serious health problems, workplace, or financial stressors. So resilience is how we adapt to this adversity, trauma, tragedy, or even the threat of such things. Okay, emotions are likely to be the antecedent of building this resilience. So the way we feel and the way we're able to like shape the way we feel is what's going to determine how we're going to be able to be resilient or not. So I did a research. One of my research was understanding why people are able to recover from dropping out of school, because I work with students and I'm very interested in high school dropout. And one of the things in understanding resilience is how people physiologically are able to deal with stress. One of the things that has to do with how do we become resilient? It's addressing our own emotions and being able to have a belief system, an internal belief system that I can recover from this. So positive thoughts will definitely have positive results in terms of talking about resilience. And also with resilience, we have to understand that it's the emotional state that will highly impact whether we're going to be able to recover from a crisis or a tragedy or something that happened. Well, our positive emotions will feed into the way we react. So children often copy what the adults' behavior. So with resilience, it's not only focusing on our students and dealing and addressing how our students or how our young people are dealing with this emotion and emotional hits, but also understanding that our students, our young people, my own children, are going to copy the way I react and how I manage my emotions. Okay. Here are some tips that we found helpful to support our emotional well-being. Number one, express care and love. I go back to thinking about Fantasia and the way Fantasia was behaving and She called everybody a whole bunch of names, and she was just like, she went on this emotional rampage that just affected a lot of other people with their emotions. But had we not said, Fantasia, we care about you and we want you to be successful, and I want to know how you're feeling, Fantasia would have possibly given up. And that emotional reaction that she had the day, not saying that we solved it, but it would have just continued without even having knowledge of like, what do we do with that emotion and can we recover from it? So number one is expressing care and love. Number two, emphasize that together, that we are together and feeling safe. Especially right now, with everything happening, we have to have that sense of togetherness. At our school campus, one of the things that I constantly tell and repeatedly tell my people is that together we're going to get through this. Together we're going to solve this. When crisis hits, that's also my reaction is saying, like, together we're going to get through this, and together we're going to support each other, because it's not a one person dealing with everything. It's like we all have to come together so that we could support each other. So number one is expressing love and care. And number two is emphasizing that we can get out of this only if we are together, that we will recover from this if we are together, that we will be resilient if we are together. Number three, encouraging others to talk about feelings. This should be a conversation that we have on a daily basis with people. Like, how are you feeling? Or even being able to say, this is the way I'm feeling today. With my coworkers, with the people that I work with teachers, with even my children, I'm able to say, you know what, today I'm feeling afraid, or today I'm feeling, scared or anxious about something that is happening. But being able to feed that emotion, having a repertoire of like words that we can use, learning to talk about emotions, learning to support somebody that's talking about their emotions, that's highly important. Most importantly, with all of this, the most important thing that we could do is being able to share our own emotions. Because if we're able to share that vulnerability with others and being able to say that talking about emotions is okay, then that's going to enhance our environments in allowing other people to talk about emotions. And care doesn't only mean like we're going to be hugging each other and embracing each other every day. Care means like being able to see that other person and to see what they're feeling, and for them to see also what you're feeling. Okay. Pay special attention in school system, in work system, in any type of environment that you're in. Pay special attentions to signs of withdrawal, of lower performance, of violence, and also negative self-harming thoughts. Because this information about withdrawal or like reducing the performance or just having violent outbursts, this is giving you a lot of information on how that person may be feeling. So pay special attention. But I'm going to go back to the first one. It's like we can't go wrong if we express care and love for other human beings. What we want to accomplish together. So at my school system, we have these clear guidelines of what we want to accomplish with emotional poverty, with addressing emotions, with talking about emotions. And number one, we want to develop emotional structures for not only our students, but also for all of the adults that come into our campus. Number two, we want to foster and maintain positive relationships. One of the most important things that we could do is have positive relationships with each other. Not only between coworkers, educators, not only between students themselves, but also positive relationships have to be between the principal and the students, the principal and the teachers and administrators. Everybody has to be able to maintain and enhance the positive relationships that we have in an environment. And number three, create a safe and caring and productive environment. And in my case, creating a safe, caring, and productive learning environment, because I want my students to be successful academically. But before I could do that, I have to go back and say, okay, what is the level of care and what is the level of safety in order for my students to be able to learn without any distractions. Okay, in order to move towards these goals, we had to seek a resource, because I think a lot of us are thinking, okay, let's talk about emotions, and emotions are important, and emotions in the brain and the stages of development. That's very important, Norma. But where do we start? You know, for me, in order for us to get started with something, we adopted Emotional Poverty in All Demographics. And this has been a book that has allowed us to do a lot of work towards building a positive and caring and loving, caring environment at our campus. So in learning more from Dr. Payne and the work that she's doing with emotions, we're able to put that in place in our campus. And that has given us that common language. That has also given us tools. That has also given us an opportunity to continually reflect and say, what from this information that we have about emotions and emotional poverty and environments and the stages of development, how does that fit into our own school environment? So if you're looking for something like, where do we begin in addressing emotions? It's going to be, a lot of times we think it's going to be costly and it's going to require a lot of time. I'll tell you that putting something in place with addressing emotions has not taken a lot of time, actually has enhanced how we spend our time together. Second of all, it wasn't absolutely costly, because if the administrator is able to learn about emotional poverty and then bring that into their school, this is something that has definitely given us just a resource for where do we begin to talk about emotions. Dealing with emotions and dealing with our own emotions and the emotions of others requires constant reflection. So this is not something that this is not something that when we talk about emotions, it's a one-time topic, a one-time professional development, a one-time learning experience, but it requires all of us to continually reflect on our own emotions and also the emotions of others, okay? Regulation is difficult because the strategies that work for one may not work for others. So this is why we have to continually reflect and say, okay, if this emotional strategy worked for this student, for this particular person, how do we enhance that emotion? But it requires all of us to also be in tune with our own emotions. Secondly, the strategies that may work today with dealing with emotions and dealing with positive emotions may not be the strategies that work tomorrow, okay? Because every day we're dealing with something different. So take time to learn about emotions. Take time to reflect on your own emotional well-being. And most importantly, allow others to do or allow others to learn more about how do they deal with their own emotional well-being. Take time to take care of yourself, because only by being able to take care of yourself, you will be able to take care of others. To close, at my school, we've developed this framework, and there's 4 pieces of the puzzle for this framework. The first one is care. The second one is academic recovery. The third one is resiliency. And the fourth one is mentorship. Okay, 4 important things that in any situation, in any new thing that we're going to do at our school, we go to this framework and we say, okay, how is this initiative, or how is this program, or how is this new schedule gonna support these 4 things? The number 1 is care, academic achievement, resiliency, and also mentorship. How is that gonna fit? But I always go back to my educators that in anything that we put, a new math program, a new leadership program for our students, a new sports program, how we move furniture at our school, anything that we do at our school, I always go back to this question of how are we expressing care? How are we expressing care not only for our students, but also for anybody visiting the school, for our parents, for our partners, and most importantly, also for our teachers? How are we going to ensure that our teachers feel cared when they come into our environment? So with anything that we want to do, if we want to put together a mentorship program, a leadership program, a working program for our students, we go back and ask the question like, okay, how is that going to address care? Care is consistent, and it has to be a consistent theme in developing a safe school environment. Not only a school environment, but I would say any environment. I think if you work anywhere you work and you work with other people, you have to ensure that other people are feeling cared. Emotional poverty training has advocated that we do need a better triage process for identifying and also for being able to serve our students. So with emotional poverty, what we've been able to do is we've been able to say, okay, not only how do we respond when we have a time of crisis, but most importantly, how do we prevent crisis happening within our school system? How do we prevent our students from going into this like emotional hits constantly? We know that we cannot control the outside environment of our students, but we can definitely control what we do within our schools, our school campus. Emotional poverty has advocated that we have a better triage system to serve our students and to also address potential risks. The bottom line is that we should be assessing threats before we should be assessing our students before there's an act of violence. Creating a school environment that demonstrates care can help you eliminate some of these risks from developing. The first step in creating a school culture of care and mutual respect is to start addressing what are you doing in terms of your own emotional realities. Okay. Secondly, schools should seek to adopt a behavioral threat process that remains faithful to it. So if we say we're going to adopt talking about emotions, and in the aftermath of a crisis, these are the things that we're going to do, then these are the things that we have to do to tailor it for every student, for every individual at our school. We have to be faithful about talking about emotions. Okay. The front line in supporting our students in a time of crisis is definitely going to be a culture that is developed and around care and love and respect. Emotional poverty has allowed us to see our students and also the people that we work with through a more human lens. It has allowed us to see that we are all emotional beings and that we all carry emotions, and also that we're all affected by a whole bunch of things that affect our own emotions. But also, most importantly, is that sometimes we can shift those emotions because other people are counting on us to have, an emotional well-being. In order to best support our students, we have to first start taking care of ourselves. And this is something that I continually do at my school is I'm constantly saying, okay, teachers, tutors, front desk person, admin, how are you taking care of yourself? Because the work is hard, but not taking care of ourselves and our emotional well-being and our well-being, our whole well-being is definitely not going to impact our environment in a positive way. So just to leave off, just to finish, to wrap it up, I do want to give you one homework assignment, whether it is in your school environment, in your work environment, or in your home environment. I want you to take time to ask somebody, how are you feeling? And then be able to determine how do you support people in having positive emotions. So thank you very much. It is a pleasure to get to share what we do at our school. And it's also a pleasure to share and learn from everybody. And I'm going to reiterate, it's so important to stay together, to stay connected, and to be able to share what great practices are out there so that we can continue to improve our environments. Thank you very much.